morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thinking about this talk, I'm suddenly remembering a Talking Head song, David Byrne, Once in a Lifetime, off that wonderful Stop Making Sense album and film of the same name. So I'm going to paraphrase that tune which just came into my head. Someday you may find yourself in the Arnold Park Zendo, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? I don't know how I got here, but here I am, so I must be here. So just thinking about reflecting on what I might say, I can say my life is reminds me of one of those connect the dots by numbers that you might have played with as a child. You connect the dots, and then at the end you see a picture, but you don't really know what the picture is until you're done. So I look back at my life, it's like that. It's like there's all these connecting pieces. But not until this very moment can I see what the picture is. So I have to say, three miracles happened for me that I need to share with you. One is that I am alive. I was not supposed to survive the catastrophe that hit me a little over 2 years ago. And here I am. The second is that I got up and walked to the bathroom. That is a miracle. And that here I am back in the Arnold Park Zendo, which is like a home to me. And every time I walk in here, I want to cry. Because just being here is the third miracle, being here surrounded by so many wonderful people who are on the path with me. So thank you all just for being here and for the effort that it takes to keep coming back here. So I'm happy to have been asked to give this talk. It's a way of paying homage to all the people who magically appeared along this mysterious path that guided me and supported me every step of the way to get here and to stay here for 55 years. So I say I don't know how I got here, but I'm going to try to explain as best I can the circumstances that brought me here. Very improbably, I say improbably because I grew up in a very Jewish neighborhood in Boston, surrounded by Jews, many of whom had survived the Holocaust, or their parents did. I grew up in that environment, and everybody who knew me was aghast that I was suddenly transformed from a nice Jewish boy, fluent in Hebrew, to a Buddhist chanting sutras and Dharani and going to meditation and shaving my head. My parents were freaked in the 60s when I had long hair and was a genuine hippie. And then when I shaved my head, the first month I landed in Rochester, they were even more freaked out. So, thinking about this, when did I was aware of the doubts of existence? I'd say I was 6 years old. I have a vivid memory of walking with my friend Melvin to the school that everybody went to, the elementary school. Everybody in the school was Jewish. We had the Jewish holidays off. But I remember at 6 years old, somebody said, Superman's going to be on television. I said, who is Superman? He said, this man that could fly and do other things. And Melvin had this hood that zipped open. And he said, come on, let's fly with me. And so I ran behind him and flapped open, a zip opened. His hood is one of those hoods that zipped, and it's kind of like wings. I ran behind him, flapping the wings. And at that moment, I remember a very vivid thought. What if this is just a dream? What if all we're doing is just a dream? And that made sense, somehow that made sense to me. But that's my first memory of that there is perhaps another reality here. So I'll say at the outset that I've had 4 brushes with death. And the first one was 4 years old. I was accidentally pushed off a dock into a deep water lake. I could not swim. I was 4 years old. I was with another 4-year-old. And I fell into the water and I couldn't swim and the water was very black. I can still remember every detail, just like all the near-death experiences I can remember. And then that was at 4 years old. And then I thought this was behind me. And then at my first session in 1972, so how old am I then? 24 years old. And at my first session in my first Doksan, I ran in, and to my surprise, I said to Roshi Kapleau, I almost died when I was 4. And he looked at me and he said, the significant thing is that you lived. So now what are you going to do with your life? That was my first Doksan and first session, and somehow it hit home. So I was recalling my 4-year-old experience of near drowning. The only thing that saved me was there was a branch floating in the water that I grabbed onto. And I'm bobbing up and down, gasping for air and completely terrified. And I remember, the last thing I remember is my 4-year-old little friend ran home to get my mother and his father at this cottage they had rented. So here I am bobbing up and down, seeing my mother every time I came up for air on the shore, waving her arms. And then miraculously, I remember, I will never forget this ever. 2 big hands grabbed my ankles and I knew I would live. And the next thing I'm on the dock, he's giving me CPR. So that was at 4. At 44 was another brush with death. I'd call it near death, but somebody corrected me. A friend said, near death, you need to see the white light or something like that. But I knew I was in every one of these that death was just on the other side of this fragile life. So I'm 44 years old, riding through on a motorcycle through Mendon Ponds Park at dusk. Lawson Sactor, now Lawson Roshi, was behind me. And out of the gloom of the dusk comes this deer. It was like seeing a Halloween mask that didn't belong there. And I knew I was done for. Jumped over the front of my motorcycle wheel and I hit her rump, the deer, with my windshield, and I flew literally like a rag doll. I remember there was nothing I could do except fly through the air with my arms flapping just like a rag doll. And Lawson was behind me. He thought for sure I had died. I was about to die, which was what I thought in that moment. I can still. They say when something like this and you think you're going to die, your experience of time completely changes and everything slows down. I can still see in my mind's eye every ridge on the teeth of this deer, and her tongue and her nose was like surreal. And I went flying and I looked, my motorcycle slid down the road, skidded down, the sparks were flying. I thought it was going to explode. And the next thing I know, I'm on the ground, getting up, brushing myself off, getting back on this bike and riding home with Lawson. I had a mild stroke about 15 years ago, and I got up without any deficits. I was the only one on the stroke ward who got up and walked out. And my neurologist told me at that time it was probably a fluke. So I kept on running. When I say I kept on running, I've been running up until this last stroke 2 years ago, which left me battered and bruised and without the use of my left arm and leg. So my running career is over. So I had a mild stroke 15 years ago and I completely forgot about it. But I will tell you, I worked very hard to stay in shape. And even though I'm told the stroke could not have been prevented, the doctors are convinced that the only reason I survived is that I had been running 3 or 4 miles a day every day for the last 40 years. So I've survived 4 close calls. That changes you. Like Roshi Kapleau said to me in 1972, the significant thing is not that you could have died, but that you lived. What are you going to do with your life? So my life has been kind of charmed in a way, and I feel very fortunate because I know for sure that I'm going to die. I mean, we all know that, but we don't think it's going to happen to us. But what the Buddha said is true. To be born is to face death, sickness, old age, and death. So that's one of the things that got me here. So like I said, I grew up in a very ethnic Jewish neighborhood. I went to Hebrew school for 5 years. I read the Torah in Hebrew and understood it. So 5 years until my bar mitzvah, but this is the interesting part. This is another dot in the picture that winds up in the picture that brings me here today. One of the main things I learned in Hebrew school was that I do not believe in God, and I felt something was wrong with me. I remember having this, what are we doing all this for? We're reading Hebrew. We're reading the Jewish Bible in Hebrew. Why are we doing this? I looked around. I didn't see anything important happening that related to this course of study. But that was a significant thing, realizing that I'm asking the question, is life real? What is real? And to me, God was not real. So I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood, and I always had assumed that I would go into the military, not because anybody in my immediate family was in the military, but that's what I expected. Because I had an uncle who was in the Navy, and he was kind of like a role model. He actually went to college, which my parents did not. The high school I went to, I'll tell you what I'm leading up to. One of the major forces that brought me here was the Vietnam War. And I'd never really questioned what was going on in the world. But all of a sudden, my friends were going to the other side of the world, some of them never to return. So that was another point, the Vietnam War. I did not question the war, even though it was just another reminder that death was not so far away. It was very close to home. You could see it on the TV every night. People were dying. My friends were dying. And my first day of college, shocked the hell out of me. I walked into one of the classroom buildings and somebody was literally standing on a soapbox denouncing the war. Up until then, I didn't have much of an opinion. But I will say, I asked the question, what is where I didn't know enough, but I was asking the question was, what is worth dying for? What would I be willing to die for? The other big connecting points here was, besides the Vietnam War, was Woodstock in I think it was 1969. So Vietnam, Woodstock, college experience. I have to bring psychedelics in here. LSD, peyote.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, I'm just an ordinary person who grew up in the 60s and 70s. So the forces that were, I just said the Vietnam War, Woodstock, psychedelics, and the last one I have to mention is the peace movement itself. Got wrapped up in that. I was on the front lines of the peace movement. And the last thing in my college years that would directly link me here was from the peace movement. The question was, what is worth dying for, and what is life? What is life itself? So I started reading as I was heading off to do a pilgrimage to Haight-Ashbury in 1968. A friend of mine who I was traveling with said, you gotta read Herman Hesse. He said, you gotta read these three books. Siddhartha, Damien, and Steppenwolf, which I read on that trip. I remember reading Siddhartha in Berkeley, on the Berkeley campus, reading Siddhartha. And from there I went on to the French existentialists, Sartre on being and nothingness, Alan Watts on the taboo against knowing who you are, and of course Siddhartha. This is college. I have to go back a little bit to the 9th grade. I made the decision that I will be an architect. And somehow that tied directly to how I wound up at the Zen Center when the Zen Center was closed to members. I didn't know that my decision to be an architect would lead me to the Zen Center, but in I think it was 1970, a couple of things happened that led me to this very place. One was four students in Ohio were killed by National Guardsmen. And I was at Syracuse University studying architecture. And like most or many, if not most colleges, after those students were killed, the campus went into chaos. And they took over the administration building, and classes were shut down. So I had a choice. In the architecture school they gave us, the architecture school, architects generally have a social conscience as part of it, dealing with the built environment. So they gave us a choice of finishing our thesis. I was in my last year, it was 1970. I was in my last year of architecture school working on a thesis, and my thesis was a multi-generational, multi-use structure in Cambridge near Harvard University. It was an urban renewal project to build a large urban community. And when classes shut down, I changed my thesis from working on an urban structure to research on utopian communities, which led me to the Mennonites and the Amish and the Shakers. And so that they all had a religious underpinning to their communities. So coming off of the existentialists of Siddhartha and realizing my thesis was not going to be on an urban community, but it was going to be a hippie commune. So that's what I wrote my papers on in that last year of school. And then I got out, and I had been working for an architecture firm in Cambridge for the 5 years I was in my education. And I was the envy of my class because I'd been working for a firm for 5 years. And I showed up for work. And I'm sitting there drawing lines on paper, and all of a sudden I had this kind of epiphany. I said, what the hell am I doing here? What am I doing here? I'd been working summers since I was 8 years old. My father put me to work in the family business. And I'm sitting there saying, what am I doing here? And I got up and I said, I am leaving. And I just went home, and I went back taking a menial job. I went back to work, first driving a cab in Boston. That's another life-threatening experience. It's true, I quit the cab company when a cab driver got murdered not far from my father's restaurant in Kenmore Square near Fenway Park. So yeah, I became night manager of my dad's restaurant, and then on the weekends, I had concocted this whole, as part of my thesis, I had concocted this whole idea of a hippie commune, farmland. So on the weekends, we would take off with 2 or 3 of my friends who were then working for me. They were employees. We were running this restaurant. We'd go searching for land in Maine, in rural Maine, up near Bangor. So on, and turned out that there were other back to the land groups there. So we bought a 175-acre abandoned dairy farm. And I, in my mind, I thought that living on the land and being self-sufficient and living a simple life, growing vegetables, milking goats, and harvesting chickens' eggs with goats, chickens. I thought that was the key to a spiritual life, and that if we stayed true to that self-sufficiency, simple life, that we'd find our spirituality. There were 8 of us, and I was nominally the leader of our group. And I realized, what do I know about any of this? I still had the questions, what am I doing in this world? Turns out there were other groups there that were founded on a spiritual basis. So we became close with one group that had come there from Cambridge that we had met. And one of the guys there, as part of that group, was a would-be Hindu. So we would get together one night a week, and people would teach each other what we knew. So in that context, we practiced what people knew. So we did Hindu chants, and then there was a Sikh group. We did Kundalini, things like Kundalini, breath of fire. And there was one guy there who had been to Rochester and had been to I think a 3 or 4 day session. So he showed us how to sit. So we sat up in the barn. So I had exposure to Hinduism, Kundalini, a little bit of Zen, and decided that if I'm gonna dabble in all these religions, and I should really go back to my own and give it another chance. So we joined. We were all, they were friends and family, my brothers-in-law, my girlfriend. So we joined this Orthodox Jewish synagogue in Bangor, Maine. I have to say the original reason was for Saturday morning brunch, which was delicious, and they were thrilled. They were thrilled to have they were like many small congregations. In Judaism, you need 10 people. It's called a minyan, for God to hear your prayers. And so they needed 10 men to be present in order to have a legitimate prayer group. So they were thrilled. We had four guys. So I practiced for maybe 6 months with this Orthodox synagogue and met this young rabbinical student. And my girlfriend, this is the other thing, at 1970 is when my thesis changed to a utopian community, translate to hippie commune. Philip Kaplow came to Syracuse University and gave a talk in one of my dear friends' religion class. So I want to mention her by name since she's probably the most important one who I'm talking about Angela Stewart, Bowden Roshi's wife. She was my girlfriend's roommate, and Kaplow came to her religion class. So having tried probably half a dozen other religious I'm getting this sign from Truman, so I got to move on.
Just a 5-minute warning. That's what you asked for.
Anyways, Angela, she was practicing before any of us, and one day on the farm, I realized that I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a practice. I didn't have a religion. I was dabbling like everybody else. And then one day I said, my partners in the farm, they were signing up for unemployment and food stamps and all this stuff. And I said, this isn't what we came for. But I didn't have anything like solid. So really it wasn't an it was kind of an existential crisis, but I realized, here I am leading this group, and where am I leading them to, and what are they doing? So the farm, my girlfriend, Joanne, who was Angela's roommate, one day we looked at each other. It was March 31st, 1972. We said, this isn't working, and I'm not capable of turning this around because I didn't know anything about leadership. At the time, I did not have the skills to resolve conflict, and I did not have anything I could say, this is what we're doing. So on March 31st, we said, we got to get out of here. This isn't working. Where are we going to go? And Angela was already at Rochester along with another guy we knew from Syracuse. Some of you may remember Shoal Schuster. Passed away a couple of years ago. He was here. in Rochester, and Angela was here. So we said, where are we gonna do? So April 1st, we left our farm near Bangor, Maine, with 4 feet of snow on the ground, and we arrive in Rochester, a 7-hour drive. And guess what? There's no snow on the ground in Rochester. And I say to myself, what a favorable climate. The growing season here must be a month longer than Rochester. And then, as fate would have it, our friends, we had friends, Shoal, and there was, at that time, there were many Sangha houses where people who were working as trash collectors and whatnot were living together in clusters in Park Avenue, not far from here. So we moved into 33 Rowley Street. We're very welcomed. And the next day we we rang the bell here at Arnold Park, and the person came to the door and said that membership was closed. We needed to go away. So we were turned away. Membership was closed. There were so many people coming here. There was such an overflow of people trying to get in. And the Zendo was full. And what's now the dining room was called the Sub-Zendo, which nobody wanted to sit in. They said, what's the problem? And some people said, what's the problem? You're going to have a sub-Kencho? So anyways, the doors were closed and we had to sit with this affiliate group on Dartmouth Street. James, I'm looking at you. That was Martin Johnson's house. That's when I met you.
Yeah.
We came there for the affiliate group. But somehow, my 9th grade decision to be an architect opened the door for me. Not only was I an architect, but I came with a carpenter's toolbox, and the word got around. And the next day, basically, I had not read the 3 pillars. I'd probably sat maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And the next day, and for the next 3 years, I was sitting the full staff schedule. I woke up the next day. Fortunately, I had glanced at the 3 pillars. Joanne had spouted what she knew of the 3 pillars as we drove from Maine to Rochester, and here we are, and I'm sitting the full schedule right away. It's a complete mystery how I survived that, but for the next 3 years, there I was on staff when my friends the membership was closed, but I was here going to session right away. So those three years were just a remarkable time. I knew I was home. That's all I can say is I am home. This is the practice for me. Roshi Kapla was the teacher for me. I had no doubts whatsoever, and so whatever hardships came my way, and there were many, there I was on staff, and I just knew I was home. So I've never looked back, but I have to say it was grueling. Sesshin was grueling, but death was just sitting on my shoulder. So I just kept going and going. And it was my architecture background that I was thrust into. Position of great responsibility, which made my life even more difficult because I was responsible for the link, the walkway, and the Buddha Hall. And anybody who's worked for Roshi Kapleau knows that if you're working on the physical plant here, you're in the line of fire. It was really, really difficult all the time. In fact, I left staff after those 3 or 4 grueling years. And then I left for 25 years, practiced with 3 other teachers, 3 other Zen centers, but somehow I knew someday I would come back to Rochester and continue on this path at this center. I had a couple of important dreams. And one of them revealed to me that Bodhin Roshi was going to be my teacher in this final phase of returning to home. Is this a good point to stop, Truman? Okay, I'm gonna end it now. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, just a couple of questions. So I think what we'll do is we'll just start with online, maybe 1 or 2, and then see if, I'm sorry, in person. Sorry, Joe. In person, we'll start with 1 or 2, and then we'll go over to online, see if anyone has anything there. So any questions?
Barry, is there a God? What does this community have to do with it?
Yeah, I think whether there is or isn't a God does not matter anymore. And I think the Zen experience, some people would say that is an experience of God. I think the Zen experience eliminates the need to give this amazing experience a name like God. We call it true nature. It's at some point it ceased to matter because to me the Zen practice does answer all those questions about what is reality, or is there a God, or who am I?
Neil, you had something?
Barry, you spoke about your brushes with death. I know in some states they have right to death laws. At any time during this rehabilitation from the stroke, did you ever think of ending your own life?
No, I've never gotten to that point. It's been a very challenging time. I've wondered. I was in a coma for 2 or 3 weeks, I'm not sure. And I asked this question to Roshi. if I had died, would I have known? Still a question. So no, I have not sought death. I know it's going to come. So in the Zen of Living and Dying group, which is a wonderful group for those who are wrestling with life difficulties, or even if you're not, which is more difficult, living with difficulty or dying with because of difficulty. I don't know, but no, I've never had what they call suicidal ideation. I've had discouragement as I struggle to learn to walk again, or to use a toilet, or you name it, use a computer. I've had discouragement, but not the kind that would lead to suicidal ideation. Not that.
Barry?
Oh, sorry, we're gonna move on online now. I wanna make sure we can capture those folks. One or two questions.
So if anyone wants to speak online, unmute yourself, and then when you're finished with your question, make sure to remute yourself.
What advice, Barry, can you give for the people that are sitting here now in front of you?
Did you get that, Barry?
No.
And he asked, what advice can you give to those who are sitting online in front of you?
Advice?
Yeah.
Keep going. Just keep going. You know, the thing, just to go back to, have I had suicidal thoughts or ideation about this practice has carried me through so many difficult. I remember after one session thinking, I could get through anything. If I could do this, I could get through anything. So that training was everything you need to know is going to come through that sustained exertion carries, it's in everything. It's like, to me, it's like life is like sesshin. Right now, every day is difficult. Go from one day to the next, working just to take that extra step. One more step.
All right, we're gonna end it here.
Perfect place.
Perfect time, yeah.